everybody. Welcome back to the Brando and Joe podcast. Our guest today is John Zager. He graduated from Hofstra University with a master's degree in IO psychology, the same program that Brandon and I are in right now. Has past experience at Pepsi, Jet.com, Walmart, and currently works at Wonder as an associate director for people analytics. Welcome, John. Thanks for joining us today.
Welcome.
Thanks for having me. It's good to be on, and hopefully we can talk about some fun stuff today.
Yeah, absolutely. I know both Brandon and I got to talk to you separately in like different occasions just about the world in general. So I'm glad that we kind of all been able to come together like a full circle moment. And Brandon, you guys got to talk at PsyOp, right?
Yeah, I think we had like a 5-minute interaction in the Hofstra like hall or something. Whatever they do when they all have their rooms.
Yeah, that was fun. It's always interesting because there's so many people that I feel like I think I'm 8 years out of the program now. So it's fun. It's like, oh, like familiar faces, new faces, and like almost like a dog with too much stimulus, like running around the place. So yeah, it's just nice meeting you there.
We have the best, I think, like gathering, right? Because I've heard of like other schools that do it too. But from what I know is that like Hofstra really does it at PsyOp. Like we have a big group that goes.
Oh yeah, and we have a reputation too. A good one. A good reputation. Just to clarify for those listening.
No, I would say it's cool too because like the Hofstra one specifically, when you think about it in terms of PsyOp, we do like our own Hofstra networking event called Houndstooth, and we do that separate from PsyOp. So that's like something that we do once a semester or once a year. And that gets some of us there, but it's in New York. But I feel like at PsyOp, it's different because everybody's there. So you get so many people from like so many different places of the world, and they get to like all talk like that graduated at Hofstra. And you're like, wow, you're all the way over there now. Like, how'd you do that?
Yeah, and also like PsyOp's the mothership. So, people, no matter where they went every year, I think roughly half the active people in the field go to PsyOp. So it's huge, huge, huge.
I'm excited to see kind of like where it is in 10 to 15 years. So, I mean, we talk about it every episode, how big IO is getting. And like every year, I feel like just doubles and doubles and doubles. So like, is PsyOp just going to be massive in like 15 years? Like, is it just going to be like very well known? Like, it's already well known, but I guess who knows?
I hope so. Could be fun.
Yeah.
You're trying to get John to answer. Tell us. He has to tell us and predict what it's going to be in 10 years.
Oh, I don't know. You can check ONET, see the growth rate of the field. I'm sure there's a way you can make a guess.
One little research project.
Go straight into modeling. Yeah, you guys are on the level. All right, cool.
It's
a pretty good segue.
Yeah. To get into, I guess, the bulk of the episode, as we said before, you graduated from our program, and I mean, just obviously you've done very well. You're super successful, and you've had so many cool different positions.
You guys.
Well, at least we think so. But we wanted to start off. So after you graduated, you started working for Pepsi, and you had this like total rewards, but like a bit of finance kind of work in there as well. Can you kind of talk to us about like what led you to accept that offer, and just the type of work that you did right out of graduating?
Kind of like a mix of dumb luck and good reputation. To be completely, that is exactly how I got in the door at Pepsi. So I started Pepsi actually before I graduated. So I started Pepsi in my last semester. So I was living in the Upper East Side, commuting to both White Plains and Long Island. So I had some pretty long days. I did not have a car before this. I was taking Metro North and LIRR. So I didn't get a lot of sleep. But they didn't fire me in those first few months, so that means I was doing a good job. But that being said, how did I get in the door at Pepsi? So I've always been like a big like stats Excel person. Like before even doing grad school, I was working in databases on like more of the administration side, not necessarily the design side. So and I love stats. I think those are the like consistently good grades I've ever gotten, and I've selling, yeah. And I think what happened was essentially Pepsi was, or the department that I joined at Pepsi was looking to hire somebody who could run the budgetary finance, but also could do like exploratory statistical analytics. So my understanding of the story is the leader sort of put an ask out to basically any of the HR people within the local area, within Pepsi, and said like, hey, where do we even find this type of person? And then one of the Hofstra alumni who's working at Pepsi, who I believe still at Pepsi, basically reached out to the Hofstra program and said to the professors, and basically like, hey, like of your current graduating class, give me a short list of people who are big on the data, could probably figure out how to do Excel around a budget, and my name ended up on the list. And I was fortunate enough to convince them in the interview that I could do budgetary finance. I had a minor in business, but I took no finance classes. But I'm so I hope that helped convince. But yeah, so I got the job. And came in. First tasks were basically like, how do we have a consolidated budget? And so I think the word consolidation is like one of my, I guess, strengths, is like you take all these data sources and consolidate to then tell a story. And the first priorities were like, how do we make a consolidated budget in a way that's not taking us, 10, 15 hours a week to just figure out, like, we got, obviously between Pepsi, there's a lot of corporate functions and a lot of like different places money would sit. So it's like, how do we have the consistent sort of source of truth of like dollars remaining in the budget, like the actual forecast between all these fun things. And so I did that. So I started my role dedicated as budget. So I did no IO stuff. I was just, basically the budget guy for the HR department. And then through a lot of work of, using various tools for automation, so a lot of Power Query, so like in Excel, Power Query, and then automating stuff using an accounting software that I dare not say its name. We ended up sort of freeing up my time, where we were able to then go into like, okay, like how do we look at sort of more HR analytics, more people analytics, where it's like, how do hours relate with turnover? How does overtime relate with turnover? Can we potentially use compensation data to predict attrition and time to hire? And then that's how I ended up with both finance and analytics as my purview, but definitely growing in that role, and also like having leaders that would sort of take those risks, because it's easy to just put a person in a corner and be like, you're the budget guy, you do good at budget, good luck. So yeah, very, very fortunate to have leadership that sort of allowed the role to expand, not only me just doing my best. Goes both ways.
It's so true though. I know Joe and I talk about it a lot on this podcast, and we went through the process of applying to a lot of jobs, and just that like two-way street of the hiring process. But not just that, like once you are hired, it's still like a two-way street. Like they've got to invest in you, you've got to invest in them. And I feel like that's kind of what you got to experience, John. Like they were basically giving you the lay of the land and letting you do the work you needed to do, but also like giving you the opportunity to learn and grow.
Yeah, and there's a ton of learning, growing, and it wasn't always a perfect ride. Obviously there are bumps along the way. You try something, it doesn't work, and then you see what you've learned. But again, I think that's one of the challenges. Like, how do you find those leaders who are willing to invest in you and willing to take risks, and like, what's the future model? What's the future? Because these things take a lot of time to build and focus on.
I was waiting for you to kind of talk about that like compensation piece, because I know part of your title was like total rewards. Did you work often with compensation data, or was it kind of like a small piece that like you did every once in a while?
Yeah, so the analytics was actually the primary source of data, was the comp data that we were working on with Pepsi.
Okay.
So basically, my formal reporting structure was through the Comp and Ben Center of Excellence at Pepsi. Again, I've been out of Pepsi for 5 years now, so I have no idea how they're structured. But at the time, there was a sort of global Comp and Ben COE. Within the global Comp and Ben COE, there was like Americas, and then like North America has its own Comp and Ben COE. So I was within the North America Comp and Ben COE, and I was within the, I guess, focused on budget and analytics on their behalf. So any sort of analytic, it more or less came to my desk, which was fun.
And when you had, because I'm guessing that you guys had an internship class too in your Hofstra program,
Yep.
or during the time there, how did you connect it to IO principles, because sometimes I have the same issue where I feel like I'm working with the data and I'm like and I'm like,
St-
yeah, it's
Statistics.
IO.
Yeah, I
Okay,
feel like
I'm not by myself
well,
then.
it's true though, because like it's I would say HR data has an existential crisis that business data does not. And I feel like when you look at like compensation data, you look at hours data, you look at like how people are treated by the organization, and when you measure them as a function of that data, you're like, as opposed to like, oh, we sold 100,000 widgets, right? It's like, this is a person at the end of this data. And I think like when you, as an IO practitioner versus somebody coming from another field looking at that data, like sort of like data scientists, or sometimes you'll see like engineers who have like a BI background coming into people analytics. um, that sort of like existential crisis isn't necessarily a dedicated part of their training. So I think that's, and maybe it's like slash empathy. Let's add empathy to that, because it does help.
You know, I want to give Joe some credit there because John, the point you just made is the exact connection that Joe made when
That's
giving
what I
his
was thinking.
presentation.
I
So
knew something.
Doing it
yeah,
right.
so Joe, you
Yeah,
hit the nail on the
you
head.
got the
No,
interview question
no,
already. You're good.
I totally agree. I mean, especially when you work with comp data. I talked about like that motivation piece behind it when you're working with like bonus structures. But at the end of the day, like you're sitting behind a computer and like the output, or not the output, the outcome that you decide affects these like hourly wages, their commission plans. To me, I'm like, oh, like I'm just an intern, da da da. But and then I was like, but then you got to remember, these are retail workers working, like you got to remember like the
Yeah.
impact.
Well,
That's the word
also
I'm looking
like when
for.
you think
Everyone.
about like, you can even go further. It's like as an IO, like you get concepts like organizational justice. You get like all these fun things that like when you think about like a comp structure, and think about how like you're going to roll out a comp structure. All right, well, you have the, as an IO practitioner and someone with an IO background, you have the sort of wherewithal and formal background to say like, hey, when you think about like how do you do change management of this type of stuff, like, hey, we're changing this. They're probably losses higher than gains, like this is how they'll feel, or like we're giving them something, but will they actually feel like we're giving them something? Are they educated on like, we're rolling out a new benefit, is it more work for them, is it less work for them, how do they actually interpret that? And there's just so much context where it's like, even if you're not doing like dedicated survey or assessment work, like that context from the IO background, I would say, especially when it comes to like working with human capital data, gives you such a rich context to be way more impactful.
Yeah, and I would even add that like that's partially why people analytics is growing at the rate it is like, and there's so many companies that are like creating these people analytics teams, and some of them are even fully IO, which is really cool. Like I feel like we're growing as a field due to people analytics and AI as
Yeah,
well. Like, and I'm sure John, like in your experience, is that something that you've been kind of seeing as someone who works in the field a lot more than Joe and I have?
I think it depends. So one of the challenge, so it's twofold. I think for things like coding surveys, I think for like sentiment analysis, like sort of speech to text, that type of stuff, I think it's really cool. I think, and now because I've had debates with this, or debates about this with a lot of other IO practitioners, and I think one of the challenges with AI, and I think it's good. I think where it's going is good. I think right now it's very nascent. But I think one of the big challenges with AI is at the end of the day, I'm going to get yelled at for this, but at the end of the day, it's a regression model. At the end of the day, you're going to have false positives, false negatives. There's a lot more math behind it. I'm sure there's a cloud involved, but like you still have those issues. And the other sort of assumption of a regression model is like, you know, the future state will continue to be the past. If you're in an organization where you have a pretty stable population and stable behavior, roll out all the AI, because your past and your present are going to act very similar. If you're in a unstable organization, or if your company is going through a lot of changes, or if there's some sort of third variable that you're not aware of, exercise a lot of caution at this point. But I think it's some really cool and impactful stuff.
So now I have to give you credit because now you're in the same company as Dr. Church. He said that on our podcast a
Yeah,
couple
smart
months
guy.
ago. So just out here throwing out a bunch of compliments, I guess, today. That's my
Yeah,
job.
yeah. All this alignment, this is great.
No, it's awesome though, and like the fact that we are having alignment is something that's good because that means that like the people in the field, especially like people like yourself or people like Dr. Church or even Joe, like it's going all different levels, and all of us are saying the same thing, and like that, I think that speaks volumes because that means that even though the world is changing, like we are all kind of growing around it, and I think that's something that you can see, especially like with people analytics as a field in general.
Yeah, and I'll tell you even further back to like the what makes IO so great is having the understanding of statistics to a degree to be like, hey, you know, here's what it is at its core. I can read the documentation. I haven't taken a data science class, but I can read the documentation, understand what's going on, and make an informed decision without, pursuing a degree in data science.
Yeah, absolutely. I felt like for people who are in psychology and like the statistics realm and like school a lot, had that idea, and then when I came to work in like different kind of businesses and different positions, I didn't realize that that wasn't like a common theme among just like people in general. And it is kind of like a learning curve that you're like, oh wait, I really do have to take note that some other people don't might not know the statistical knowledge, and
Yeah.
like I have to like incorporate that into my work as like the storytelling part.
Yeah, and also I'd go further. It's like the way, at least through our program, when I was in it, and I'm sure you guys have the same sort of curriculum, is you get the design of the statistical tools. Not necessarily here's a regression, use a regression, or here's a language model, use a language model. You actually understand how the regression works, like what it's doing, how it's using variance to sort of estimate where the next point will be, and that's incredibly powerful.
Yeah, the act of knowing that is huge, and like as you said, this is going to be a big callback, but to your business minor, you didn't necessarily have that finance background, but I'm sure like when you were taking those business courses, you had some like statistics courses that you would take, but it didn't go into the same depth that IO was. So I kind of want to use that as our segue to go into more about like you now starting an MBA program and looking at that. So you are starting an MBA at NYU. Like, what was the drive behind that for you?
Oh, actually, just to clarify, I'm finishing an MBA at NYU. So
Oh,
I
finishing.
have
Oh,
another.
that's my bad.
I will. Yeah, you're good. You're good. Why am I pursuing an MBA? So why am I pursuing an MBA? So I think for me, one of, especially as somebody who's worked in like people analytics for basically my entire active career, one of the like my clients are people with MBAs at this point. Because once you move out of the analyst, you're in the manager. As the manager, you have clients, either executive clients, business partner clients. You got clients, and most of your clients will be people with like formal business backgrounds, usually a formal degree. And as part of working with them, in the same way that like IO, you learn a language, there's a body of knowledge that if I were to take an IO, I would assume they would have with someone with an MBA, same game plan. And I felt that to understand their context, I needed to better understand their language and also better understand how do they approach problems. And it's very different from how an IO would approach a problem, but they're not wrong in their approach, because when you think of, because I it's again, different fields, different focuses, different disciplines, and I think for me to be effective, sort of moving forward in my career and also current state, it seemed like a no-brainer, and also it's fun to learn more stuff, so there's that too.
Yeah, absolutely. And you kind of answered my question, but I wanted to know about like the similarities and differences between the two programs, like on like a day-to-day basis. Are you talking about similar topics and different approaches, or is IO about motivation and talent management, and MBA is about I can't even say because I have no idea.
So I think it's like a totally different focuses. And when I think there's like sort of like IO's kind of ribbed the MBA is like, you don't understand talent management, like if only. And to be fair, it's potentially an elective in an MBA program. because I would say, sort of like, to use a bee metaphor, the like IOs focus on like how do individual bees or like teams of bees work in a hive, and like, what makes them motivated, what gets them to do the stuff, how do they identify good ways of processing things, how do we make their whatever bee work better, right? But like from the perspective of an MBA, they're looking at the hive, right? They're looking at like, okay, there's a hive, we're competing with those 5 hives. The bees are part of our calculation, but like we got a lot to deal with, and it's like, what's the nature of the forest, how's the weather, like that kind of stuff. So very different focuses, different disciplines, and at least for my career, having both perspectives is complementary.
That was a really good analogy. I think that
Yeah,
that
I think
really
we found
summed
our
it up
quote.
for me. Yeah, that's our quote for the week.
Yeah.
No, that's a great analogy. And I want to ask, like, as someone who did business in undergrad, like, did you also like look for an emphasis with your MBA?
Mhm.
And like, if so, did you pick like what emphasis would you pick, or did you pick for that specific like program? And I also wanted to know, like, in the coursework that you're taking, is it something that you're directly applying on a day-to-day basis, or is it more just adjusting the thought process? Because that's what I saw as like learning IO. Like in IO, like when we get our masters, it's like changing the way that you think.
Yep.
Like, does an MBA do that same type of thing as well?
Yep. I would say, to start with the end of the question, I do think an MBA does change your perspective in the same way an IO degree changes your perspective. Because again, IO degree, the nature of bees, MBA, the nature of hives. Or I guess more like the nature of hives in nature, not necessarily how does the hive itself operate. That's social organizational psychology, which is a different discipline altogether. But back to the original point of like, what did I focus on? I picked NYU. Part of the driver for NYU's program was that they have a big emphasis on finance, which is something which is as far away from IO as possible, as like corporate finance, like the financial services industry. How does, like, if you have a company, how does a cash flow work? How does a company actually like operate financially? Like as an IO, like how do people operate, but like how does a company itself operate? And I thought that was, again, back to the complementary when you're doing measurement of people within an organization, is how does the organization actually function from a financial standpoint, which that's where I focused.
You bring up a good point. And I think we actually talked about it before about having some financial knowledge in an IO program, maybe not like corporate finance, but we thought it might be helpful that, like, as an IO student going into the corporate world, just understand at a basic level of like how finances work within a company. I think it'd be useful. And it's another cool point is that we're hoping to have more people on the podcast talking about like IO that work in the financial industry or like in a financial company. Because you're right, it's kind of two totally separate focuses, but it's an interesting thought.
Yeah, well, like, think about, as an IO, you get, judgment decision making as, part of it, like either introduced, or you might actually take a formal class at some point, or it'll be a subset of one of your classes. But like, how does a business make a decision? So if you, and part of that is, obviously you have all the, you got the laundry list of biases and heuristics, but also like there's tools like business, as part of the formal education in an MBA or business school, like they'll be introduced to tools of like, how do we make a decision? You have 15 to 20, ideas for the next quarter. Here's the ones that we think will be most profitable or most beneficial for the organization. All right, well, how do you measure that? Okay, like here's the cost benefit analysis. How do you run a cost benefit analysis? Okay, well, there's these 12 ways to run a cost benefit analysis, and then you have to pick the one. In the same way that, like, when you make a decision, like you might use a decision model, and it is actually a decision model just based off of sort of financial best practices.
Yeah, it's so different because I know for me personally, when I made that, I did the transition the different way than you did, John. Like it was like I did business psych, and I'm sitting in my first semester of class at Hofstra, and it's like social psych, and it's like so different. Like it felt so different than what I was learning in business because everything was like very. I wouldn't necessarily use the word concrete, but it was just a lot more regimented. It felt like than social psych and organizational psych, where that sometimes felt a little more up in the clouds a little bit more, I guess is the best way to put it, when I was going over those topics versus like talking about like a cost benefit analysis or doing accounting
Yeah.
or stuff like that.
Discounted cash flow or
Yeah.
yeah.
Exactly.
I had one more question. It's kind of like a deviation.
Yeah.
Did you ever think about teaching? Like just the way that you explain things, like I mean, I know, like just your B example. I was like, wait, that would like, I love that example. Like,
I'm not opposed to teaching. I just think I'd be a really strict grader, and I feel like I don't want to do that to students, which might say something to me if you eventually try to work for me. But it's neither here nor there.
But they learn something.
Oh, they definitely will learn something, but there'll be a real rough curve.
Interesting thought. But I know we're nearing the end of the episode, and as we always finish off our episodes, we wanted to ask you one last question. For incoming IO students or people just about to join the corporate world, do you have any pieces of advice for them?
Well, obviously, as an IO, it depends. I think I'll give my favorite piece of advice that I actually got from a mentor when I was an intern. I think I was in college. And it was basically, you don't know what day somebody else is having. And when you're basically at any point in your career, you're going to be interacting with people, and everyone has a lot of stuff going on. And sometimes, people are having bad days, and it is. But just remember, like, it'll be fine. It'll be fine. And the other one is everyone has imposter syndrome. Just deal with it. Like, I don't know what more to say. Like, I remember there's a thing at PsyOp, and they did the survey, like, who here has imposter syndrome? It was like the whole crowd. It's like, okay, like we're there. Like, like I don't know where to say. Like, welcome to the club.
It's honestly like fair though, because the idea that imposter syndrome exists, like you have to just know it, then you have to move on from it and understand that. And I think that the other piece of advice that you gave about like you don't know what's happening on the other side of the day with whoever you're interacting with is really, really fair, especially for people who are trying to enter the field, because you start off on maybe like a lower position. So you're working your way up, and you might be dealing with managers, you might be dealing with peers, but you have to like learn how to like talk the talk and walk the walk around all of these people all the time. And like that, we learn about corporate politicking in IO as well. Like you do have to understand that like there's some things you just got to get through sometimes, and like imposter syndrome could be one of them as well. Yeah. But like also somebody's day, like you just never know. Yeah. I think that's really good advice.
If you want another free one, positive attributes are hard to gain but easy to lose. Negative attributes are easy to gain but hard to lose. Back to that,
the
what's your
negatives
brand?
More salient.
Like it's very hard to dig yourself back from a hole. Yeah. Fun stuff.
I like it. We need a John Zager fortune cookie company.
Oh, I wish. Could you imagine?
But I do like your point about new venture.
Mm-hmm.
I do like your point about imposter syndrome though, because I feel like it goes hand in hand with just like getting anxious about jobs, and much easier said than done. But you got to be able to find a way to work through it. And if you kind of like break down, I guess is the word to say, kind of have to find that way to push through. And I see what you mean.
Well, also like I've like, and I know we're over, but like I had an interview where I forgot how a correlation worked. So like you'll be fine.
We've all been there.
Yeah, we have like this one, or you know it because you did the program. Like we have that one class where we all discuss our internships, and we talk about like interviewing and internships and all those different things, and like hearing the different stories of how other people's internships are going or how their interview process is going. Like it reminds you that you're not alone, because we go through these things and they feel so intense in the moment, whether it's like a crappy interview or just a tough day at work, or even a good day and a good interview. And then like you hear other people like have similar things, and you realize that like as crazy as this feels right now, like this is just like a moment, and someone else is probably experiencing this too.
100%.
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
Well, John, we want to thank you so much for coming on here with us. I remember when you and I were chatting on the phone back in like April, and we were talking about getting you on here. So I'm really happy that we were able to make that happen. Coming full circle, it's really been awesome to get to see you again. So
Yeah.
thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for taking the time and having me on. It's been a pleasure. Cheers.
Yeah, no, it's going to be a good one. I'm excited.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye.
See you, John.
So once again, Joe, another great episode. That one was fun. I feel like since both of us like were able to speak with John before the episode about other things, it really like was really easy for us to talk to him about his work and everything he's done because he's just so knowledgeable.
Yeah, 100%. I like that he like graduated from our program, and is doing very well, and then also is able to talk about it in like a very what's the word I'm looking for? Like easygoing way, like understandable. Just a super knowledgeable guy. He's a great resource to have.
Yeah, I mean, talk about somebody who gets involved and does a lot. I mean, going and getting an MBA while also working and the at the level he's working is extremely impressive. I would say that that's just something to strive for just based off of watching how he's progressed through his career. It's something that young students like us can look up to.
Yeah, and just the breadth of the companies he's worked for, Pepsi and Walmart and now Wonder, like it's inspiring.
Yeah, we didn't even get to go into all of them because we went down so many tangents.
For those who've made it this far, we are having him back on. TBD.
Yeah, we got to get into the other companies.
But thank you everybody for listening, and we'll hope to catch you next week.
Take care, you guys. See you next week.